Good morning. Welcome back to Professional Insights brought to you by the National Referral Network. And this morning we've got a great conversation because if you're a business owner looking to unlock greater profitability, streamline your operations, and prepare your company for a game-changing exit, you're in the right spot because our guest today, Dr. Alan Gatling, is a seasoned business consultant. He's got some amazing experience, degrees, but we're going to talk about proven methods for evaluating sales efficiencies, optimizing internal processes, tongue twister there, and everything you need to know about optimizing your business. But before we get into that, hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure you put any questions below. We've got a lot of content here, and I hope we get to it all. So with that said, let's get started. Alan, good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate you being here. Appreciate the time. I know you're busy. So with that, let's jump into this. I know we've got a lot of content to cover. So
Yes.
when we've got 3 topics we're going to try to get to, and you and I spoke before, these 3 topics can be individual conversations, which we will most likely do.
Yes.
But let's start with some of these internal processes because really it's kind of the groundwork. But what are some of the methodologies you use to assess companies to make sure that their internal processes are moving the company forward?
Yes. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really a opportunity to listen and understand.
Okay.
When people come and I get an opportunity to visit with them, they often have not been listened to understand what they think their pain points are or what their strategy is. Now, the interesting thing is when we delve into it, into a systematic evaluation, we may find that what they perceive the problem is actually isn't the problem, but a symptom of the problem.
So, and here, you and I talk about this too, about deviations. So there's a lot of business owners that put a lot of weight into their CPA's opinion on what direction the company should go in. Now, I pick on CPAs quite a bit only because I think they should kind of elevate their game.
Mhm.
Why are more CPAs not being proactive and showing their business owner clients some of these nuances that you just mentioned?
I think the primary thing is, and I look at my own education as my undergraduate degree is in accounting, and then I passed the CPA exam and practice also as a fraud examiner, is that we were trained as historians,
Okay.
not as forecasters. So
Mhm.
we take information that has passed and then try to do an analysis based on that. I cannot think of one class, one instructor, one course that really was about forecasting and helping people be more efficient and better in their business practice.
I don't even know what to say to that. It's out of all these interviews, that's the first time anybody's ever explained it that way.
Well, I are one, so I mean, I can cast aspersions on the profession. It's a weakness in the profession, and I know particularly in MBA programs like I'm teaching in that this is a hot discussion topic of there needs to be better training into helping
Yeah.
those professionals assist their clients in looking forward rather than looking backwards.
And so when you go through these process, whether a CPA, because by the way, that could be a whole conversation in and of itself as well.
Yes.
As you evaluate these processes, how you dig in, how do you ensure buy-in from employees when implementing these changes? Because a lot of people don't like change.
No. Well, and a matter of fact, the most owners are not real excited about change either,
Right.
just like the employees aren't. What I encourage people to do is to have an open conversation, and I'm often present for these conversations to say that, look, we're doing an evaluation and looking at ways that we can improve the profitability and the overall structure of the company, and you elicit their help because often the employees know what needs to be done or what needs to be changed. They've just been either not allowed to or fearful of communicating those areas.
And then with communication in those areas, right, and there could be a lot of it.
Yes.
How do you balance, or how does a business owner balance some of these short-term fixes with these long-term process improvements that help build that efficiency without creating chaos?
Well, first of all, you have to decide, is there something that you want to do strategically, or is this something you have to do tactically?
Gotcha.
If the business is losing money, if the business is losing its markets, um, the potential of upcoming tariffs is going to change the landscape of manufacturing and retail in this country. So if you are looking at that from a tactical standpoint, it's going to require some actions or activities that will play into a strategic viewpoint, but may require some more immediate and maybe larger changes than you would if you had a period of time to implement.
Now, a lot of business owners, Alan, because they're not getting the information that they need from their CPA, which most likely they have, right? And there's
Yes,
CPAs, CFOs, everything, but most likely everybody has a CPA.
yes.
How do you measure the success of changes? How do you implement those KPIs? And I know this is a big question, what KPIs should you initially start with?
What I start with is looking at what we call the financial ratios. And there's a number of them that it's too lengthy to go into right now. But I compare that to industry standard and to businesses of comparable size. The reason I do that is if they are not at least measuring up to their peers, there are areas we need to look in to understand why. If they're greatly exceeding certain financial ratios, then we also want to understand why so that we can replicate the success. So the base starting point for me is comparing to the industry and to their peers.
So, which is always fun because there's all those analogies with business owners
Mm,
is that they continue to do things that don't work. And then when things do work, they don't continue those. But most
no.
oftentimes they don't do either one because they don't have the necessary data to do it.
And they don't understand the why. And the why
Interesting.
of success or the why of failure oftentimes is more important than the event itself that it leads to.
So we've had these conversations with a lot of professionals across many industries or specialties, Alan.
Mhm.
And some of the things that we just talked to prepare a business for an exit. And when I used to work with clients raising capital, it was always have the end in mind.
Yes.
And so, what financial metrics or indicators, because we just talked about KPIs, do you prioritize when helping a business prepare for an exit?
Well, particularly, let's say that their profitability ratios are looking favorable. The one thing that I will look at and focus on is debt ratios.
Okay.
Is if the indebtedness is still a primary source of funding or being able to capitalize the business through debt, reducing that debt prior to succession planning is paramount. People do not wanting to buy a business and inherit debt. That needs to be reduced or at least eliminated if at all possible.
And how long does a business owner need to kind of allocate in terms of building this exit plan or succession plan optimally?
In my experience, 18 months to 3 years.
Okay. And why is that?
Normally, it's not only a matter of finding someone to sell the business to, be it a internal or external candidate, but you also have to look at the tax consequences and then also for yourself to plan what are you going to do with your life. If you are an entrepreneur, it is unlikely that you're going to sit on the couch or play golf for the next 20, 30 years and be happy. So part of this is also saying, what are you going to do with yourself?
So we've heard that quite a bit from other professionals. So how do you help business owners emotionally prepare for that transition over that time period?
Individual counseling turns out to be often recommended. Well, and it's if you're an A-type personality, which most of us are, that are entrepreneurs, that we get into this, we don't just sit back and watch very well.
Right.
We can do it for a very short period of time, and then the itch will start. And there is nothing wrong with starting another business or having an, shall we say, taking an avocation and turning it into a successful part-time business or working within not-for-profits. Volunteerism. Find a cause you're passionate about and participate in leadership of those types of organizations. But you got to have a plan.
Right.
Without a plan, you're going to flounder and you're going to be frustrated. You're going to be angry. Your significant other will throw you out of the house. It's just not a happy time.
So we interviewed another colleague, and I think the analogy they used was if you own a business and then you sell it and you go do something like a nonprofit, it's not like you're going to be sweeping the floors. Eventually, you'll be moving up the ranks, probably, right?
Well, hopefully, the one thing that kind of a sidebar on that is most nonprofits are staffed by very capable people.
Yeah.
Their volunteer corps has a depth of experience, but they seem to get real stupid when they assume a directorship or something else. They seem to lose their business sense. So I don't know why that is, but it's really important that you continue also to continue to develop, and whatever areas that you see, if nothing else, just maintain currency with understanding the markets, financial conditions, how to work with people.
Right.
A not-for-profit, for instance, transitions you into using a reference power rather than, shall we say, position power.
Interesting. And you mentioned golf or fishing, or I mean, pick a hobby, right?
Pick a hobby.
You can't do that 8 or 9 hours a day. So what are some misconceptions that business owners have about this exit process? And psychologically, how do you help address them?
I think once they see that the financial aspects of this are taken care of, and that there will be whatever revenue stream or lack of revenue stream, whether it's just a one lump sum or over a period of time, once they understand that, then it's helping them to learn to disconnect with that business. First of all, it is very tempting to try to keep your hand in the pie, even with new ownership, to try to give them your advice and sage information, even when it's unwanted. So learning for them to redirect their attention into something constructive is probably the biggest challenge, and identification of what that is for them, and then helping them develop a business plan on what's next for them is critical.
And part of that, optimizing that value of that business, is like we talked about it at the beginning, kind of some internal processes. And so, what are some of the key indicators that a company's sales process is
Mhm.
inefficient, and how do you diagnose some of those root causes?
There are standards. I come out of the technology industry, with high tech. Microwave communication systems was the niche that I worked in, and we
Mm,
had actually fairly efficient ratios of how much production per se that an individual salesperson should be producing. At the time, it was approximately, you should do it at least 10 to 20 times the salary plus commission that you were paying. So if you're paying someone, let's say $100,000, and often it would be far more than that, that they would be making at least 2 to 3 million in terms of actual revenue sales. So there are
oh,
these
wow.
established ratios for most niches that you know what the productivity of the salesperson should be. And if they aren't meeting those standards, then to understand why they're not meeting those standards, whether it's they don't have the tools, they're the wrong people, approaches, marketing, et cetera, and then remedy those one at a time.
But Alan, how do you? So I was watching a TV show, and they talked about, this. I don't know if it's a real term, but psychological egoism, right? Everybody has this self interest.
Yes.
How do you align my self interest as a sales professional with the broader organizational goals?
Sometimes you don't. What you hope for is enough of an alignment that they are motivated to be productive and engaged. Sometimes that is through, surprisingly enough, I found recognition
Mm,
is often more valuable than compensation. You have to pay them a nominal amount that is their expectation. But I found that motivation often comes through making sure they are heard, that their actions and their advice is taken into consideration. They know that it is, and then they're recognized when they exceed expectations. Buys
So,
you a lot of credibility.
so I've talked to friends and clients who own businesses, and they struggle with this, Alan. They struggle with having a salesperson not pulling their weight
Yes.
and feeling bad as if it's their fault that this person's not performing. And it's kind of a bad place to be. I mean, are those KPIs that need to be kind of put into place to help eliminate that?
Yes and no. I mean, you have to set standards and you have to set benchmarks. This is one of the frustrating things that I've seen is people know, at least they believe they know how to manage people, but they have no idea how to coach salespeople.
Ah,
And coaching is really the key to this, and it's more of a strategic decision than a tactical one. If you have a brand new salesperson, helping them develop those skills or even understanding what the necessary skills are and then nurturing them into being successful. Whereas if you have a seasoned salesperson, helping them to keep motivated, because we all tend to be somewhat lazy from time to time. And if we're receiving, shall we say, stellar compensation, regardless of what I do that day, why should I work harder?
there's a
And so you
balance,
get
but Alan, there's a balance between, and this came to me, so this will be interesting to get your opinion.
all right.
There's this balance between the high income, like a salary, right?
Yeah.
And a lower salary and a higher compensation on the commission.
Yes.
And I've read different articles that talk about if you're a salaried employee and a higher compensation on that with bonuses,
Hmm.
then you're psychologically that people tend to be more company focused. Whereas if it's a lower compensation and higher commission, they tend to be more self focused. Is
I
there?
don't agree with that.
Okay,
Uh,
awesome.
I believe that for proper motivation, particularly in this technology sector, I'll
Yeah.
focus it on that, is that to be motivated to go out to reach out to people that are going to say no and to have the motivation to overcome those objections and find solutions requires a great deal of self motivation.
Mhm.
And more people are able to, if they have a 50% salary base and 50% commission bonus based, I have found that to be the most successful mix. If you pay too much in terms of salary, I'm going to get the salary regardless.
Right.
And when things get hard, it's harder for individuals to be motivated knowing that their livelihood does not depend on making that next sale. I'll get the one after that. Whereas if they understand that a significant portion of their compensation comes from commissions, even if it's and this is particularly true when there's a long sales cycle, let's say 12 to 18 months,
Right.
that having that mix of base and commission, it can really, in a longer run, be more successful than a higher salary and bonuses on top of that.
And isn't this part of the hiring process? Like, how do you evaluate a sales professional? And we'll call them sales professionals, right? How do you
Yes.
evaluate a sales professional for a job when resumes might be a little embellished?
Well, resumes are untruthful and references often are useless. So
Agreed.
the best salespeople come from people that you know and trust. So if you have a colleague that says, "Hey, I've worked with this individual and they're stellar and they have these attributes," referral is the best way to hire good salespeople.
And do you set those expectations up front? Meaning, look, if you don't perform in 90 days, these are the steps. I mean, I guess
No.
you do that legally. I don't know.
Well, I think obviously, like, if you're on probation, and depending on the state you're or country that you're working in, if you're in France, the answer is no, because it's lifetime employment, regardless. So, but in most right to work states, you if you set expectations and they do not meet those expectations within a time frame, that you have the right to terminate them. Now, you may need to show progressive discipline or a PIP, improvement plan, but I don't believe that those are motivating. In some ways, I think those are demotivating. It's really about the leadership that inspires a good salesperson, a good hire to perform above even their expectations. So I put a lot of the responsibility on the leadership as much or more on the individual salesperson if there's poor sales performance in an organization.
So that old analogy that crap runs downhill or rolls downhill, you don't necessarily believe in that? I don't.
Well, I I would, the reality is yes. Is it the best? Absolutely not. But it does happen all too often. Most of the issues when I go into a company and there's a sales problem, it is 90% of the time sales leadership. It isn't the salespeople.
And so with that, so how do you ensure improvements in the sales process if it starts with leadership and the leadership doesn't recognize it?
The leadership often does not recognize it, or will not recognize it, and most of the time it requires a replacement.
Ooh,
It's tough,
that is
but
especially like and like I said, I've have friends that own businesses, and a lot of the leadership is the ownership,
it
and right, and the
is.
VP of sales is an owner, and it's hard.
Yes.
What are you going to do with that?
Well, you still have to have a very honest and frank conversation of saying, in this capacity, and the way I often turn it is to say, if you had this situation, what would you do? And
Uh,
lay out the facts. Make it totally unemotional, make it very logical, make it very systematic, and saying, you're now responsible, and here is the situation. What would you do? How would you handle it? And I've had the majority of time people have a revelation and they'll say, well, I probably would replace that person or move them to another position within the company if that was possible.
wow, that's interesting.
So you have to present it in it isn't about you did bad and with the finger pointing.
Right.
It's more about helping them to understand that they're not on the right seat in the bus.
Which is a challenging conversation.
And especially when it's the CEO or president, that's even more of a
Ooh.
challenging conversation where you're brought in by a board of directors or, shall we say, warring factions and trying to find out, where the truth really lay, which is it's with none of the groups, it's somewhere in between. And then
Interesting.
coming down to, again, working with people to eliminate or reduce the emotions, and let's look at what can we do to move forward, always keeping that forward orientation, not I don't really care what's happened in the past. Now we need to do, what can we do to make this work moving forward? And that helps really let out a lot of the steam of the room, because
And
people want
but
success.
having the vision, yeah, having the vision from the leadership, and I think that's a challenge though, Alan, is that a lot of business owners don't necessarily have a vision. They don't have an end
No,
in mind to keep
no,
them on course.
no. And this is where, we talk about the necessity of a business plan early on in the evolution of a business, but I don't think it diminishes as the businesses grow. If you don't have a vision, if you don't have a plan, if you don't have goals and objectives, then you're going to flounder. And a business plan or some type of strategic plan, we don't have to call it a business plan,
Right.
but something that represents here's where we're going, that can be communicated to everyone, and everyone is accountable to that, including the ownership, then it makes life a whole lot easier to get buy-in.
And
Because it's
understanding it's
either you
not
meet it
linear.
or you don't.
Right. And it's not linear, right? Going from point A to, going from A to Z in a business is not simple. And I like those images that most business owners think it's a straight line, but really it's a messed up circle, roller coaster, upside down, sideways.
Well, we look at project management, the fundamentals of that, which most business people are somewhat familiar with, and setting up a Gantt chart. Well,
Yep.
Gantt shows contingencies and latencies. And when you start laying out your business to where there are things that have to be done, and if these are not accomplished, then it will delay other aspects of the business. That really starts to take a lot of the fluff out, and we just see the facts.
Hmm.
We need to have sales. We need to have policies and procedures that are followed and adhered to. We need to have the right structure of compensation and HR. And when any of those things drop or fail or don't meet the expectations, then it impacts other aspects of the business.
That's amazing. Alan, I want to be cognizant of your time. I really appreciate it. I know that that was a very good place to end, but any final thoughts? I know we covered a lot.
I think in parting, the one thing I encourage people to do is to step back.
Okay.
Either you step back, and that most often happens with a mentor, an outside advisor, someone that can help bring perspective, because as business owners, we often do not have perspective. So gaining perspective is one of the most proactive things you can do to help your business be successful.
I love it. Alan, thank you so much for the time. For you guys that are watching, please hit that like and subscribe button. Put your questions below. Reach out to us. I'll have Alan's contact information, website in the description below. Please get that perspective, get that help that you need to get that business to the next level. Alan, once again, thank you so much for the time. Look forward
Thank
to
you for
having you
having
back
me.
on. Okay,
I look
have a great
forward to
day.
it. You too. Thank you.